Every few months, that same old debate comes back. Altcoins are going to rotate, alt season's coming. The data is kind of saying something different because we have had a big policy change. So I'm going to showcase what the data is saying, why the policy change matters, and why, more often than not, you're probably going to find liquidity is going to go into Bitcoin, not the altcoins. So the biggest misconception, and we could talk about what's on the screen here, which is obviously Bitcoin. QT ending equals altcoin mooning, right? That's obvious. But that isn't what happened. We're going to talk about it because we're going to talk about why this is rhyming with other years and why it's important for policy. Because as you can imagine, yes, this is not how it worked in 2019. In 2019, the Federal Reserve announced that QT was ending in August. So let's go to August, right? So if we're going to go all the way to August, now this is just Bitcoin, and we need to talk about the fabric of this because it's important. Obviously, what happened after August into December, January 2020, we all know what happened. Then they became a bit of a problem. That balance sheet started to rise quite aggressively in September, and I will talk about that in a second, because it's important to note that these kind of misconceptions from other content creators is, because that's happening, we're going to get flooded of, we're going to go into QE very, very easily. It's not. QT and QE does not equal the same thing. Because when we talk about the balance sheet, the credit and liquidity programs, give or take, right? It's rough. But when we talk about why this is important, so obviously we could talk about how in September it then started to rise. It obviously got very, very, very aggressive because something broke. We all know what happened. You following? So there's this kind of thing within content creators to kind of get views at the minute is, right, QT's ending, QE's going to start. We're going to make loads of money. We're going to sail off into the sunset with our yachts and our Lambos underwater, technically. So we need to talk about that because, yes, it has ended. The balance sheet will not rise yet. Dominance of Bitcoin will probably keep trending up. And we do need to talk about that because dominance will rise before liquidity returns, not after, realistically. Because as much as we've had tops in the likes of 2017 and 2021, the top in 2025 isn't really showcasing the same sort of vibe, is it? We have had a different market. The altcoins haven't ran. The retail interest is no longer there. And that's important to note. So when we talk about how, the inflows of social media and stuff, and Ben Cohen mentioned this, there's been no real retail inflows. And I can showcase that on my own YouTube analytics. It's very, very obvious. And it kind of does mirror the 2019 kind of vibe in a way. It was very much interesting to note that Bitcoin has topped before any liquidity was kind of given to us. And you could argue, ETFs, have they been the main catalyst for this? And that kind of does make sense. So when we talk about QT from 2019, what actually did happen over the course of this time period, we kind of went up quite a lot. We rose again. And then obviously we did drop eventually over time. What did happen, obviously, later down the line was obviously something we couldn't really account for. But even though altcoins and Bitcoin realistically has bounced a little bit, the Bitcoin dominance hasn't really moved. It's been quite break even. So what happened here in 2019, as you can imagine, QT ended, dominance rose, the balance sheet started to rise in obviously the September time, and then eventually altcoins bottomed months later. We're talking months and months and months later, not like the following week. And that's the thing. When we talk about how low altcoins went, we can talk about obviously the COVID crash and all that kind of stuff. Realistically, what did happen was it took a long, long time. But I'm not even joking here. The altcoins didn't really pump until here, realistically. Like the 2020s, the end of 2020s, realistically. That's scary when you think about it. And this is what backs up the entire argument that maybe when this does happen, we're probably not going to get much of an altcoin flurry for a good while yet. Because what are we expecting here? Dominant surge, altcoins bleeding, altcoins going to bottom in Q4, then rotation? Well, realistically, what sums all of this up is probably your altcoins are not ready. We're probably not going to see an expansion of this balance sheet until probably March 2026, February 2026 at the latest. Got to remember, tax season in January, Christmas period. Anything going to happen? So it may be a good few months away. So, as I said before, we'll talk about altcoins a little bit and talk about the Bitcoin bearish market in a way. But let's talk about this, because on the screen here, you can see very, very clearly time horizon. This is Ethereum, just to kind of showcase stuff. So obviously, yes, I've highlighted in 2019, Bitcoin topped in around June point, right? We then had that situation with the QT, but altcoins kept bleeding in their BTC pairs. And even when I'm looking at the USD pair of Ethereum here, going back in time, nothing was happening. We all know that Ethereum is a massive, massive driver. And as you can see here, we talk about QT ending around this point here. We did nothing for a while and we went even lower. And then eventually we kind of did something in 2020. And then COVID happened. And then we reset from that point. So as I say, we're talking months down the line. And again, you can argue with a lot of things, but look at the BTC pair of this. Exactly the same situation. It did exactly what it said on the tin. QT, lower, lower, lower. We bounced up a little bit, but realistically nothing happened for a while until we at least got into the midpoint of the 2020s in terms of when basically COVID happened. It took a long, long time. And that's the thing. We probably are going to see a rise in dominance just due to the fact that QT is a massive fabric of policy change with liquidity. And yeah, Bitcoin dominance, kept rising even after Bitcoin fell in price during that time period. And yeah, you could argue COVID kind of threw a bit of a rough one, but it is unfortunately how it kind of works. Because Bitcoin is going to probably become the least bad option, so to speak, for any sort of wealth versus, say, gold, silver, whatever nowadays. QT ending just kind of follows along in the same path line that they're already going for. We already knew this was coming eventually. It wasn't going to be QT forever. But that doesn't mean QE is going to start straight away, does it? But another argument you could talk about is obviously around this time period as well, back in the days of when QT ended in 2019, nothing really happened with stable currency dominance. There was no real drive. There was no real money printing going on to get people back into the market. Obviously, it changed over time when certain things did happen, as you can imagine. But obviously, stable currencies have got bigger now. But when we talk about the likes of the altcoin market and stuff like that, and the obvious here is altcoins bottom eventually, but they take a very, very long time to do so. And we can talk about how, you can go back in time and go, well, actually, how this kind of all kind of comes about. And the thing with a lot of these pairs is, we can talk quite openly about the fact that, well, with the world of Bitcoin and with the world of obviously altcoins, it takes so long for these to bottom. When do they bottom? Is this the bottom for Ethereum? Are we going to go and retest that level? I don't know. That's the thing. We could talk about the fact that we could be going into a bearish zone here, and this could actually fail, and we can go back down and retest this low. That's quite a scary proposition, especially when we're going into, as I say, the winter, the tax season, all that kind of stuff. And if there is no liquidity, what's going to happen? And yeah, you could talk about the likes of, let's have a little look at XRP, for example. How many times this went back down to these bottoms in like 2021, back down here, the liquidity kind of flash crash here. It's a bit ugly. And there's been no real drive for that liquidity to come back yet. Anyway, certainly when you talk about retail. So yeah, you could talk about how this has kind of happened before. And you can talk about how it's likely to happen again. And that's kind of more worrying, realistically, how we could lose a hell of a lot of value in these other /BTC pairs because we are still here. We're still low. Nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. And yeah, this is not the time, realistically, to be aping into altcoins. Yeah, you could argue from a buy-in perspective, but that is fundamental of investing in other markets. We're talking about altcoins here that are diluting and got huge token unlocks and emissions where it's against the, it's against the grain. It's against everything versus, say, scarcity, Bitcoin, wealth, power. It's different. It's a different thing. And you could also talk about interest rates still being pretty high. They still need to come down. There's still a lot of talks for, Donald Trump in saying, oh, but Powell should have cut rates. To be honest with you, I think Powell's done a good job, personal opinion. I think he has stopped a cataclysmic crash at some points. We've had a couple of interesting points as well we've got to navigate. He is not one point of failure. He is not the person deciding. It's a committee, obviously. He's just the main speaker. But at the end of the day, we could talk about altseason. We could talk about where we've been in the past. As you can imagine here, what happened here was obviously very, very interesting post the QT. But ultimately, yeah, it allowed the conditions to be created to allow a bit of a pump. You could argue, yes, the interest rates are probably still a bit too high here. They need to be a bit lower, maybe to get more of that investment interest, that liquidity to come back into a better rate for investment purposes. Policy is still relatively restrictive, as you can imagine. This means that altcoins, have no macro runway yet. There has to be a reason for people to buy into them. And again, we can talk about liquidity, we talk about retail interest. We have neither there. So why would that be a huge thing to go, well, QT's ended, we're going to get that all of a sudden? It doesn't really work like that. But personally for me, I want to talk about what I'm going to be doing. As you know, I cover a lot on the stable currency dominance, more than the BTC dominance half the time. But for me, this is the main framework. You're going to talk about Bitcoin. You're going to talk about Bitcoin dominance. You're also going to talk about where's the money going. The money is going out of live assets into stable currencies right now. There's a lot of risk off situations. As this rises, it's risk off in a way because people holding their stable currencies, they don't want to buy into it. But you can talk about the other side of it. What's happening with Bitcoin dominance is also very, very, very important here because this is still here. It's still really high. It's still not giving us a clear, obvious direction. That's still risk off, essentially, because we are probably going to rise. And we've probably been like this since, September time. We're probably going to rise, realistically. And today, as you can imagine, risk off. Bitcoin is a preferred destination. Bitcoin is getting the least amount of volatility. And realistically, every time Bitcoin bounces, you wouldn't think that some altcoins in this time period have done like 20% moves on a bounce. It's crazy when you think about it. This is still here. We're not nuking. It's a crazy, crazy market. Not yet done so, check out Patreon. There's a link below, starting from a very, very low amount of £6. But also, you do get courses. You can buy these if you're not a member, but also, yes, if you're a member, you get it all in there. There's free stuff, there's all kinds of stuff, there's videos every day, there's live streams, there's everything. Jump in. Bitcoin dominance is refusing to die, and it kind of makes sense why. The inflows, the ETF inflows, especially Bitcoin, money rotating out and probably staying in Bitcoin as well. It's holding up better than we probably anticipated, considering. Until liquidity genuinely returns and retail wake up, I still believe altcoins will continue to lag. There has to be a rotation at some point, but I don't know when. But policy is probably dictating that. Maybe when Powell goes, maybe in the new year, maybe things might start changing. But that liquidity is not here yet. So try not to guess what you think in terms of I'm going to play the market that I want to see. Play what you see. Liquidity isn't here. You should be risk off realistically at the minute. Bitcoin is the strongest asset right now. It is. And it will remain that way for a while, probably. Anyways, if you're interested and you want to watch more content from me, watch this. This will probably help you in a few different ways.